Alright, so here we are at the urinary system. And the urinary system consists of a paired set of kidneys, a paired set of ureters, a single urinary bladder, and a single urethra. And the main job of the urinary system, specifically the kidneys, is going to be to maintain blood chemistry. And the kidneys are where this is going to happen. The kidneys is basically where all the action's at in the urinary system. Now, what are some of these blood chemistry parameters that we want to maintain when you think about your blood circulating through the vessels? You know, what are some chemistry parameters that we want to maintain within homeostatic limits? And one of those is water balance. The kidneys are going to regulate how much water is in the blood. And why is that important? Well, the amount of water in the blood determines blood pressure. And so the kidneys are directly involved in determining blood pressure. Another thing the kidneys are going to be responsible for maintaining in the blood is pH balance. Okay, maintaining the pH of the blood within very, very narrow limits here, close to neutral. And why is that important? Well, for instance, enzymes work at specific pHs. Okay, most enzymes in the body need to work within this narrow pH range. And if they don't, if the pH changes, becomes too acidic or too basic, then those proteins can denature. And then they no longer work, and then your body shuts down really quickly. And lastly, the last thing that the kidneys are going to maintain within the blood is electrolyte balance. And these are all different types of electrolytes. Basically, electrolytes are charged, they're particles that when they dissociate in water, they have a charge associated with them. So all of these ions here, all these charged particles, are all electrolytes. You have sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, and magnesium are extremely important. And specifically, sodium is going to be the main one that we talk about here. And why do we need electrolytes to be balanced in the blood? Well, we need to have a certain amount of electrolytes so they have access to the cells, so the cells can perform their normal job. We need electrolytes in the blood so we can deliver them to the cells, and the cells can maintain their normal cell function. And as we'll find out, the amount of sodium in the blood also affects the amount of water in the blood. Okay, the amount of sodium affects water movement, and so when you affect water movement, you affect blood pressure. So it's also involved in that. And again, all of this is being done by the kidneys. So the point that I want to make here is that here's a blood vessel with the plasma inside of it, and the kidney is maintaining all of those parameters within the blood there, within the plasma. But it's more than that. Water and electrolytes and all that other kind of stuff, it can cross borders. And so not only is the kidney regulating blood chemistry, it's also maintaining chemistry of the interstitial fluid. It's also maintaining chemistry of the intracellular fluid. Okay, so we can extend this now and basically say that the kidneys are regulating the chemistry of the fluids of the body. And what I want to try to do here is just give you a real simple schematic about how it's going to do this, about how the kidneys are going to maintain blood chemistry. And I'm going to use this diagram over here, which we will come back to. So what we're looking at here is this is a capillary bed, and there's millions of capillary beds in the kidney. And what's going to happen is that at the kidneys, substances are going to be removed from the blood. Okay, we're going to filter the blood, and some of those substances are going to be removed from the blood, and that forms a new fluid called filtrate. So the kidneys take materials out of the blood, and then what they do is they return some of those substances that they've taken out. They return those to the blood, and that actually ends up being most of the things that they take out. They return to the blood. Okay, and why do they return these things to the blood? Well, they're returning the things to the blood that they need to maintain blood chemistry. Okay, and anything that they don't return stays in the kidney and it gets eliminated as urine. So let me try that one more time. So at the kidney, what we're going to do is we're going to take substances out of the blood. Most of those substances are going to be returned to the blood. And why do we do that? Because we're returning the substances that we need to maintain blood chemistry. Now, some of those things we don't want to return to the blood because we maybe there's too much water, maybe there's too many electrolytes, maybe the pH is a certain thing, and we don't want to return those to the blood. So what we're going to do is those are going to stay in the kidney, and they're eventually going to get eliminated as urine. And so urine, this is a good point here, urine essentially represents unwanted material from the blood. And at that point, that urine leaves the kidney, and every other part of the urinary system is simply a transport mechanism to get that out of the body. The ureters are going to transport that urine from the kidneys through the abdominal cavity down to the urinary bladder. And the urinary bladder is going to store that urine until we can get rid of it. And when we do, then it leaves the body through the urethra. So hopefully, this illustrates, how important the kidneys are to the overall functioning of the body. And if your kidneys aren't functioning correctly, specifically if you get down to about 10 to 15% of your kidney function, then you're no longer able to maintain appropriate blood chemistry, and you have to go in for hemodialysis. And that's what this is showing right here. And what happens is venous blood is taken out of the patient, pumped out of the blood, and it goes through this dialyser. And this dialyser is essentially a kidney. Okay, it's taking substances out of the blood, and it's adding substances to the blood. And it's doing this based on, what we need to do to maintain blood chemistry. And after all that is done, that blood is returned to the patient. Okay, this is another thing that the urinary system does that I just want to point out. The urinary system also eliminates nitrogenous waste from the body. So nitrogenous waste are cellular waste products, and we need to get rid of those, and we don't sweat them out, we don't breathe them out. We need to get rid of them through the urine. And so the urinary system allows nitrogenous waste and basically other toxins and metabolic byproducts to leave the body in the urine. And what this is showing right here, this is an example of that. If you were to take an NSAID, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory like aspirin or ibuprofen or whatnot, that needs to be metabolized in the body so we can get rid of it. And that metabolism occurs in the liver. So it processes all these NSAIDs there, and it produces all these metabolic byproducts. And then those metabolic byproducts need to get eliminated from the body. So those go into the kidney, and they get eliminated through the urine. So as you can kind of get a feel for, urine is an extremely complex fluid. And we can use it as a diagnostic tool. We can do a urinalysis. We can analyze the physical, chemical, and microscopic components on it to test for the health of the body, to test for disease, the presence of drugs, and all that kind of stuff. And we're going to do this in the lab. We're going to do this with simulated urine, but essentially what you do is you take a dipstick. You take a dipstick and put it in the urine, and then you hold this dipstick up to this chart here, and you compare colors, and it gives you values for the amount of different substances in the urine. So let's take a look at some of these here. Here we're going to test for leukocytes. What are leukocytes? Those are white blood cells. Do you want to find white blood cells in the blood? Do you want to find white blood cells in the urine? No, you don't. Okay, you want that to be negative. What else here? Urobilinogen. Where have we seen that guy before? That's what bilirubin gets converted to in the kidneys. Do we want to find a little urobilinogen in the urine? We do. We want to find a little urobilinogen in the urine because that's part of the normal breakdown process of bilirubin. What about proteins? Do we want to find proteins in the urine? We don't. We want that to be negative. All right, we can test for pH. We want that to fall within our normal range here. What about blood? Do we want to find blood in the urine? Negative. Okay. Ketones. We can measure ketones as a diagnostic tool for diabetes. We don't want ketones in the urine. And what about glucose? Do we want glucose in the urine? Negative. If we have glucose in the urine, if the dipstick portion turns one of these colors and it shows you have glucose in the urine, what does that mean? Well, it means that you have hyperglycemia and likely some form of diabetes. Okay, next I want to get into the anatomy of the kidney, and this will really help you guys out for the lab. So here we have the kidney here, and this is in a frontal section, and it's an anterior view. And there's three main regions of the kidney. One of those regions is called the renal cortex. Now, cortex just means outer layer. It's the outer layer of an organ. So all of this area in here represents the renal cortex. And you've seen the term cortex before. What are some other cortexes you found? How about the adrenal cortex and the adrenal gland? What about the cerebral cortex in the brain? So it just means this outer layer here. The next thing that we have is the renal medulla. And medulla means the middle, basically the inner region of an organ. And let me get a better color, darker color. No, that'll work. All of this region in here is the renal medulla. Okay, that's the middle portion. And there's actually two different parts of the renal medulla that you need to be concerned about. One of those are those guys right there, all of these guys, and those are known as medullary pyramids, or also take renal pyramids, either one of those two. And they're pyramid shaped. And what's going to happen is urine is going to drip down these renal pyramids here. And what happens with the pyramid is that this is all the pyramid. There's another part of it, I guess I want to point out. The very end portion of this pyramid right there, okay, is called the renal papilla. Papilla means nipple shaped, and so this is the nipple shaped portion of the medullary pyramid. And what's going to happen is urine is going to drip down these medullary pyramids, and it's going to concentrate down there at the renal papilla. And then the renal papilla is going to drip this urine into this funnel system that we're going to talk about next. All right, so those are the medullary pyramids. And the other part of the renal medulla are these columns that separate the medullary pyramids, and those are called the renal columns. And both of those are on your lab ID list. And the third part of the kidney is essentially all of this open space in here. Okay, it's basically a funnel system. And the area that they focus on is called the renal pelvis. And this is the renal pelvis portion of it right there. It's kind of this funnel-shaped portion of it that exit the kidney. But there's other parts to it as well. So again, what's going to happen is urine's going to drip down these medullary pyramids, and the renal papilla is going to drip that into the funnel system. Well, the first part of this funnel system here, this open space, is this portion right there, right underneath the renal papilla, and these are called the minor calyces. And these minor calyces are these cup-shaped areas that are right below the papilla, and basically these are the first structures that are going to collect urine. Okay, they're going to collect urine that's being dripped out of these renal papilla here. So those are the minor calyces. And then what happens is those minor calyces all merge and they form a major calyce. And you could do the same thing over here. So singular is calyx, plural is calyces. So this is a minor calyx, that's a minor calyx, that's a minor calyx. Those all merge into a major calyx here. And then here's another major calyx. And then what happens is those major calyces, I want to use that color, form, or become, I should say, the renal pelvis. And again, the pelvis is kind of this funnel-shaped structure like so. Then what happens is that the pelvis leaves the kidney and becomes the ureter. And you know it becomes the ureter because it has the same diameter all the way across. Okay, it's the slender tube. It's not becoming more slender, it's not becoming bigger, it's decided on its size at this point, and so at that point it becomes the ureter. And the way I like to think about all of this in here is that it's a drainage system. We're collecting urine from the renal pyramids, and all we're trying to do is collect that urine and take it out of the kidney, get it into the ureter so we can eventually get it out of the body. Okay, let's talk about the location of the kidneys in the body. What we're looking at here is a cross-section, transverse section, and we're looking at an inferior view. So we're basically looking up into the abdominal cavity, except they've removed the organs in the abdominal cavity. And you can see this red structure right there. What is that guy that we're looking at right there? That's the diaphragm. Okay, so we're looking up into the diaphragm. And it gets a little confusing, the nomenclature at this point, because we essentially are in the abdominal cavity. But if you remember back to the membranes that line the abdominal cavity and line those organs, those are called the peritoneal membranes. And so the space in between those membranes is called the peritoneal cavity. And the reason I bring that up is because the kidneys right there are located in what we call a retroperitoneal position. You may hear that term, retroperitoneal. And essentially that means it's in back of the peritoneal cavity there. It's at the back of the abdominal cavity there. There is a little protection in the back. These floating ribs down there do provide a little bit of protection for the kidneys, but other than that, they're pretty exposed. You know, there's just a little bit of body wall there in between the kidneys and the external environment. Okay, then I'm just going to run through the rest of the urinary system, and this is kind of all we're going to talk about, these structures. But then we get into the ureters. Ureters are these slender tubes that are moving urine from the kidney to the urinary bladder. And this is a cross section right there, and you can see here's the lumen. Doesn't look like a very big lumen. And another thing you might notice is that it's pretty thick. Okay, the walls of the ureters are pretty thick. So what do you think most of the wall is made up of here? It's made up of muscle. Okay, it's made up of smooth muscle. And what that should mean to you is that, urine is not just dripping down by gravity here. This is an active process, and what's happening specifically is that the ureters are contracting and they're propelling that urine down the ureters into the urinary bladder. So this is an active process. And the way this happens is by peristalsis. The same way that we move stuff down through the digestive tract is the same way that we're going to move urine down through the ureters. Okay, so here you can see where the ureters come down and they empty urine into the urinary bladder. It's important on the lab exam that you put urinary bladder. There's bladder's just a general term, so we need to know where it's at in the body. So here the ureters come down, and that's where they're depositing urine into the urinary bladder. So the urinary bladder is a small collapsible muscular sac that basically temporarily stores urine. And there's 3 openings in the urine. Here's where the ureters deposit urine in, and then right next to that we have the urethra, where urine's going to exit. And this location here where you have all 3 of these holes or openings, I guess you can say, is called the trigone region. And this is important clinically because UTIs, urinary tract infections, tend to persist in this region of the urinary bladder. Okay. So what we're showing here is this is the neural control of micturition. Micturition means to urinate. And urination is going to be under nervous system control. So we have a sensory component, an integrative component, and a motor component. And you guys don't need to know this whole thing, but I want you to know the major components that are involved. Okay. So the first thing that has to be involved, and let me try to find it on here. There we go. So the first thing that we have to have is a sensory component. And this is the sensory component right here. And what type of sensory information is this going to be detecting in the urinary bladder? It's going to be detecting stretch of the urinary bladder. So when the urinary bladder fills up with urine and it stretches, that stretch is detected by the sensory neurons, and those sensory neurons take that sensory information up to the brain. Now, what part of the brain does that take it to? It takes it to the brain stem, and specifically to the pons. This is where the micturition center is located, the urination center is located. And it receives this information and it unconsciously processes it, and it basically says, okay, we're having stretch here, that means that it's full of urine and we need to get rid of it. So now we need to activate a motor component of it. And what we essentially want to do is activate smooth muscle in the urinary bladder so it contracts and it expels that urine from the body. Now, what type of motor neurons are going to activate smooth muscle? We're getting into the autonomic nervous system, and specifically we have the sympathetic or the parasympathetic. Which one of those is going to be involved? Rest and digest, that's going to be the parasympathetic system here. So what happens is the pons sends that information down and it activates the parasympathetic system. And the parasympathetic system sends its motor neurons down to the urinary bladder, and it causes contraction of the smooth muscle in the walls of that urinary bladder there. Another thing that it does is there's actually, well, not surprisingly, there's a couple sphincters down here. There's a smooth muscle sphincter. The internal urethral sphincter is a smooth muscle sphincter. And then there's an external urethral sphincter, which is skeletal muscle. And by default, these are closed. Okay, so when we want to urinate, they need to open. Well, what happens is the parasympathetic system comes down and it causes the internal urethral sphincter to relax, and so it opens that up. Okay. But this other sphincter, the external urethral sphincter, this is skeletal muscle. Okay, and so the autonomic nervous system's not going to get it. We need a somatic motor neuron to come down, and it causes that external urethral sphincter to relax. Now, because this is skeletal muscle, we can consciously control this external urethral sphincter. And that's basically why, even if we have this whole micturition reflex going on, and the bladder's contracting, and urine is trying to get out of the bladder there, we still have control over whether or not we want to eliminate that from the body, and that comes from our conscious control over the external urethral sphincter. It's skeletal muscle. So ultimately, we choose whether to relax that and to urinate. And what's interesting about that is that, babies just don't have that conscious control over their sphincter. They're not thinking up here, I don't want to, it's not convenient for me to urinate. They don't have that control over that sphincter. And so what happens is it just gets relaxed through this reflex here. And what happens next? Then they just have no choice, and urine is eliminated from the bladder and urethra. And the last thing I want to do is talk about a little comparative anatomy between male and females with regards to the urinary system. So we'll start with the female, and this is a mid-sagittal view, a female mid-sagittal view of the pelvic region. So let's orient ourselves first. There's the sacrum back there. Here's the pubis. And so right now we're in the pelvic cavity there. And there's actually 3 organ systems that are represented in the pelvic cavity here. And we'll just start most anteriorly and move posteriorly. So the first organ system that we're going to have here is the urinary system. And that's the urinary bladder right there. So there's the urinary bladder, there's the urethra. The second organ system that we have represented is the reproductive system. The female reproductive system, which is this right there. And what we have is we have the ovaries, which ovulate eggs into the fallopian tube, which is where fertilization occurs. If that happens, then the embryo implants in the uterus, and that's how it works. So we have all of the all the reproductive system there. And then behind that, we have the digestive system, and particularly this is the rectum and the anus. And so we have 3 organ systems that are all represented here. And so another point that I want to make here, because this is different in males, is that the urethra in females only has one job. And the only job of the urethra in females is to take urine from the urinary bladder and eliminate it from the body. That's a little different in males. So let's orient ourselves again. There's the sacrum. Here's the pubis right there. And, just like females, here's the digestive system in back, the rectum and the anus, all that type of stuff. But in males, the reproductive and the urinary system kind of gets mixed together a little bit, or there's a little dual role there. So first of all, let's do the reproductive. Here's the testes. The testes produce sperm, which gets stored in the epididymis, and then during ejaculation they go through the vas deferens, and that sperm's taken along the vas deferens. And what do we want for that sperm to happen? We want that sperm to be eliminated through the penis, through the external urethral orifice there. So to get there, it has to travel through the urethra. This is the urethra there in the males, and there's a couple different parts of the urethra. One, this part right there, is called the prostatic urethra. And it's called the prostatic urethra because it's the part of the urethra that goes through the prostate. That's the prostate gland right there. So that's the prostatic urethra. Then the urethra comes down and it enters the penis. And all of this tissue right there in the penis is spongy tissue, erectile tissue. And so what you call the urethra as it travels down this is the spongy urethra. So you have the prostatic urethra and the spongy urethra there. And so right there, that role of the urethra is to carry sperm and semen out of the body. But then we get to the urinary system, and here's the urinary bladder. There's a ureter taking urine down into it, and the other role of the urethra in males is just like females, to take that urine out of the body, to eliminate it out of the body. So there's the urinary bladder, and that urine is going to travel down the prostatic urethra, down the spongy urethra, out of the body. Bada bing, bada.